Welcome to 5 Books for Catholics, where an expert selects and explains 5 outstanding books on some aspect of Catholic life, doctrine, or culture. Jonathan Swift, who lived from 1667 to 1745, was a writer and Anglican cleric. He was born, raised, and educated in Ireland. With the Glorious Revolution, he moved to England and became secretary to Sir William Temple. He obtained an MA at Oxford, and he took holy orders for the Church of Ireland. Following Temple's death, he failed to secure an ecclesiastical appointment to his liking in England, and so returned to Ireland, where eventually he became Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral, Dublin. A friend of Thomas Sheridan, Alexander Pope, John Gay, and John Arbuthnot, he became one of the leading literary figures of the period. He is best known for his satirical essays and fiction, such as The Battle of the Books, The Tale of the Tub, and Gulliver's Travels. In this interview, Dr. Dutton Kearney will discuss his pick of 5 of Jonathan Swift's books. Dutton Kearney is an associate professor of English at Hillsdale College. He previously taught at Aquinas College in Nashville, Tennessee, where he was awarded Professor of the Year in 2008. He teaches 18th century literature, contemporary literature, and courses in theology and literature. He is the editor of the Ignatius Press edition of Gulliver's Travels, and has published several essays on Jonathan Swift. He is the director of Hillsdale College's Visiting Writers Program and the director of the college's new Creative Writing Honours Program. Professor Dutton Kearney, welcome.
Thank you for having me this morning.
What were the main events of Swift's life?
Well, goodness, he had several. He's born in 1667. So what that means is that just 20 years prior, England is embroiled in a civil war that leads to the Cromwellian Protectorate. In 1649, they kill the king. There's a regicide, and so there's a vacuum of power, and Cromwell steps in. And after Cromwell dies, his sons take over, and the sons really don't know the art of governance. And so what England does, suddenly London is full of regret for having killed Charles I. And so Charles II fled, as one would if that happens to your brother, and he's in France, and they bring him over, and it's called the restoration of the crown. Swift is born 7 years after that, and he grows up in the household of Sir William Temple, and Temple was Charles's Charles's Secretary of State. So Swift is born in a time of turmoil, maybe 20 years prior, but the hope in the restoration is to lay out a firm foundation going forward, that now that the king has been restored, we can get on with the business of being England. Now, unfortunately, Charles was not exactly an ideal king. He had 11 illegitimate children. He was a crypto-Catholic, which we'll probably get into a little bit later. What that means to be a papist, that's more of a historical situation than a religious one. And so he does not live up to the high standards of being a king. And when you're disappointed in an expectation, a lot of times the literature of the time will turn to satire. And so the generation prior, John Dryden, had high hopes, and so he's going to write the British epic, and we're just going to get on back on track. The civil wars and the regicide, they happened, but we've moved past them. With Charles II, that's not really the case, and so Swift is moving into this a time of maybe political turmoil, maybe a little bit of stasis, but definitely satire, and he ends up becoming, I would say, the greatest satirist. Maybe in the English language, definitely out of Britain, Great Britain, Ireland, and England.
And he did seek positions in England. He did help Sir William Temple in some political, what we now call lobbying, but he wasn't very successful, and he settled for placement in Ireland. Are there any other significant events during his ecclesiastical career?
I think so. So if you're a man in that period, you have three choices. You go to the court, you go to the church, or you go to the country. And the country would mean you have a country estate, and you would build your garden and stay out there. Alexander Pope, Swift's friend, made a lot of money translating Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, and he bought an estate. So he's Swift is friends with people in all areas. And he really had an eye on becoming a bishop in the Anglican Church, and so he had friends in Lord Oxford and Lord Bolingbroke, and they were in Dublin Castle. And Dublin Castle is within walking distance of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and so what happened, it all comes to an end in 1712 with the death of Queen Anne, because she's going to be the individual. 1711, 1712, she's going to be the monarch who would, because the king is the king or queen is also the head of the English Church, would assign would assign all the bishops, and so he is thinking that he's going to get a preferment. He's asked Temple for some help, and then after her death, it all kind of collapses. But in the meantime, he built a lot of relationships over in Dublin Castle, and so keep in mind that Ireland is kind of a territory of Great Britain. That Ireland doesn't have its own parliament. It doesn't have its own king. Everything is handled in London, and so Swift, even though he wasn't able to become a bishop in England, reluctantly went back to Ireland. But as the Dean of St. Patrick's, he found that he had enormous influence on politics by making appeals to people's consciences, not through passing laws and legislation.
Swift, even in many of his literary works, is engaging in political and social debates of the day. Was he more of a political animal or a clergyman?
That's an interesting question. That's a great question. I really haven't thought so much about that. As far as being a clergyman, what's really fascinating, so we have 9 of his sermons, maybe 12, 3 are kind of questionable, but out of those 9 sermons, there is not a joke at all. There is no satire. It is very straightforward. He really seems to have a genuine concern for the care of souls, and that he doesn't want to introduce any confusion, because in satire, the whole point of the joke is to say the opposite of what you mean, and so he definitely wouldn't do that. But when it comes to politics, I mean, there are some instances, like say in the Drapier's letters, where there's a specific political situation that he addresses. But then something else like Gulliver's Travels, it's more of a general work of satire that works toward political philosophy. So for practical politics, yes, a little bit, but maybe more in terms of political philosophy is where he resides. And then always dear to his heart is going to be religion and the formation of the clergy.
And where does Swift fit into the more general movement within English literature at that time? You have figures like Pope. He was friends with Pope, John Gay, and so forth. Where does he fit in with that?
Well, for one thing, he wrote anonymously quite often, and Gulliver's Travels was published anonymously. He got in touch with the publisher, George Faulkner, and dropped it off at the corner doorstep. Faulkner made a fortune. But keep in mind that Gulliver's Travels is written by Lemuel Gulliver, one who is beloved of God, and the pronunciation of Gulliver we see in Pope's poem The Dunciad, that Drapier and Gulliver rhyme with one another, and so if you break that down, you would trick Gull by means of the truth, the ablative of verum. So it's one who is beloved by God, who tricks by means of the truth. And what is he doing? He's tricking us about our about our very nature. And he takes this from Thomas More. You remember that the Utopia is written by Raphael Hythloday, a healer sent from God and speaker of nonsense. So what Swift is trying to do is insert himself within that satirical tradition. And he really rejoiced in the fact that his bishop, his archbishop, with whom he didn't get along with very well, Archbishop Marsh, Marsh said to him one day, "I don't think that Lemuel Gulliver was a real person." And so Swift really ate that up. But A Modest Proposal, that's written anonymously. The Drapier's Letters, that's written anonymously. So he's part of the movement in that he's not publicly known, like say Pope is, or Arbuthnot or Gay. Gay's Beggar's Opera was a massive hit. But what he does is that by being the center of all of being kind of the locus of all these other individuals, that he helps to create this literary circle that really dominates literature all the way up until the Romantics. I would say maybe 1740, 1743. He dies in 1745, but their influence kind of lasts up until then, before we shift into the Romantics.
We've already mentioned that his activity as political activist, satirist, and polemicist. However, he didn't fit neatly into the political factions of the day. He described himself as a Whig in politics on account of his love for liberty, but a high churchman and a Tory on account of his religious beliefs. Was he a sort of hybrid? He had one foot in each faction?
Yes, but not in a manipulative kind of way. I think Swift was always Swift. And the parties ended up shifting a little bit, and so as I mean, he would always be a Tory with regard to religion, because those things really can't be changed. You really want to have a hierarchy and a liturgy that is permanent. And then in politics, he did love liberty, probably more than his other colleagues, and so not all. I mean, sometimes you just don't have liberty flourish under kind of a really strong monarch and a weak parliament. And so I think what he liked was the fact that Parliament could limit the king. That's a whole problem that happens with Charles the First. Why he ends up being deposed and then killed is that he just decides the nobles won't give him money, and he decides to just start appropriating it. And so that's why they pushed back. And that the king always wants power. Or the king wants power. This is in one of his letters. He kind of triangulates everything. The king wants power. The nobles want money, and the populace wants freedom. And so what we want to do is just keep those things in tension with one another. And so why it appears that he shifts to Whig and Tory and then back and all around, I think is just really to kind of maintain that tension, that you have the nobles who would increase their power, which would mean that, or increase their station, which would reduce the king's power and the people's liberty. And so you'd want to have a corrective that would rebalance that, and so on and so forth.
What were Swift's views on the Catholic Church?
He was not a fan of Catholics as a people when he got ordained. He thought, oh, great. And he went to Northern Ireland. And he wanted, like I said before, he wanted to be a bishop in England, and so what they did is that he was assigned to like a very rural parish.
I think it's in Carrickfergus.
Yes,
it's in Carrickfergus near Belfast.
Yeah, but he wanted Belfast, or he wanted Dublin. He wanted the big cities, and as it turned out, he found that other denominations, the Catholics he could get along with, the other ones that he really couldn't, and he liked the Anglicans. And so by the time he gets assigned to being the dean of St. Patrick's, he has a very good relationship with the Catholics, and in fact, he ends up being kind of their primary representation in Ireland with regard to London. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in a lot of his writings, he is very expressly against papists. Like if you read the Modest Proposal, one of the good effects of people eating their children is that we will reduce the number of papists. And so when they use papists in the 18th century, that doesn't mean, well, we don't like Catholics and we don't like Marian devotion or rosaries or people going to the Mass. What he's talking about is having your political allegiances with the Pope, not with the king. And that when you have a papist, you're worried about insurrection. So all the time that any time that we see, I mean, there are some Protestant factions that are very much anti-Catholic for Catholics being Catholics. But when it comes to Swift and his circle, and especially in politics, that to be anti-papist is to be, I don't know that I can trust these Catholics to obey the laws that are promulgated by the king, and that if the Pope says to do something else, I have a problem with that, and so that's kind of the tension, and there are reasons for this, and you do see some like something like the Popish plot, which was revealed to be a hoax, but nonetheless, everyone is worried that we're going to have a Guy Fawkes Day Part 2, and Catholics are going to blow up Parliament because the Pope has told them to. So they use this popular sentiment to kind of maintain a sense of paranoia, and I think, like I said, I think it's just kind of a political assertion and not really a spiritual or religious one.
What drew you to become a Swiftie? Not Taylor Swift, but Jonathan Swift.
That's right. Well, I was a Swiftie up until Speak Now. Now I'm not really sure what she's doing. We lived in Nashville for a while and had a daughter who really enjoyed her, and so we went to go see one of her concerts. Well, it's really interesting that when I was in graduate school, I'm a late convert from atheism, and so when I converted, I got a master's in theology from the University of Dallas. I had to find out what did I get myself into? And so it was a really wonderful formation. And then one of my professors there had done his dissertation on Henri de Lubac. And he said, I really enjoyed reading the Greek text that de Lubac read, but it was tough kind of reading French. What I wish I had done was to choose one of the ressourcement theologians who wrote in English. And so I thought, all right, well, I want to get someone who writes in English, who knows the classics, and is funny. And Swift just checked all those boxes. And so yeah, I've just been I was a fan too. So
the first book you've well, before getting on to the books, just one other question. All the books you've selected belong to the genre in which Swift excelled most, satire. How would you rate his poetry or epistolary writing, such as A Journal to Stella?
Well, his poetry, it's okay, but he says to Pope, he says, you say in 2 lines what it takes me 8 to say, and he's right. He's not a great poet. And in fact, John Dryden is his cousin. He says, you'll never be a poet, Cousin Swift, and then that puts a chip on Swift's shoulder. He doesn't really like the truth about his poetic qualities. But as far as the Journal to Stella, that's really fascinating, because this is like, think about like a personal kind of intimate letter that to another individual, and then those poems are not too bad. You can tell that he's working on crafting them, and I suppose I shouldn't dismiss all of his poetry. There's the Lady's Dressing Room poetry, a rhapsode, and then the Beast Confession to the Priest, kind of set up as a dialogue between body and soul, and then he writes birthday poems to Stella, and he has this capacity with language to float in and out of innuendo, allusion, Latin, and then straightforward English, and then a shorthand, and so it reveals a side of him that's just really playful. I was reading one of his letters this morning, and it's a letter from Pope actually to someone else. And he says, we went over to Dean Swift's place, and we came over to talk. And Swift said, oh great, so you're here for a free dinner because you think that the dean of St. Patrick's is here to feed you? And they're like, no, we just wanted to talk. He's like, fine, all right, so we can get you 2 lobsters, we can get you wine. And he just goes through all these things, and he catalogs how much everything costs, and he says all this with a straight face. And Pope is and his friend are just they're kind of shocked at him outlining all of this, and then he says, "Fine, here's the money. Now go and leave." And he makes them take the money, and for Swift that was all just a grand joke. So the problem with reading Swift is that he'll be very serious and not smile at all and not laugh at any of his jokes, and so you're like, is he joking? Is he not joking? And he does that also in the satire, because the satire has a little hint of truth. And it's not like he writes as hard when he's writing a letter or when he's writing the journal to Stella. He's still kind of playing around with a mask and a persona. So to get the real Swift, I don't know if that's ever really possible. You can get maybe 98% of him, maybe 95, 98% of him. But he holds a lot close to the vest.
And he's very much a writer who engages the debates and issues of the day. Nevertheless, he often seems to be criticizing issues that are still to the forefront today, after 300 years. Is this the case?
Definitely. I'm teaching a course now on his book, A Tale of a Tub, and we don't have time to go into all of its intricacies. But basically, the argument is this: is that we have a severe problem we have a theological problem with how people understand what the Spirit is, and that theological problem has its origins in bad philosophy. So basically, when people talk about the Spirit, they use the language of the immaterial, but the way that they apply it is that they are really acting as if the soul is made out of matter. And so what he does is that he traces this all the way back to the pre-Socratics and their argument that kind of gets neutralized by Aristotle, and then Bacon reintroduces a way to think about materialism, and so Descartes picks up on Bacon, and then Hobbes picks up on that tradition, and Swift is right in the middle of that. And he says, well, wait a minute, if the soul is made out of matter, then does that mean then we don't have a higher claim on our soul, and we're not really going to change our behavior beyond the here and the now? And I really think that it's probably not the fundamental problem or question, but how you live your life depends very much on whether or not you think your soul is made out of matter and it comes into being and goes out of being, or if your soul is immaterial and it's not really yours, and it's something that is the form of your body, you behave differently. And so someone like Dante will say, well, if your body leads your soul, well, welcome to hell. If your soul leads your body, well, welcome to purgatory and into heaven. And I think that something like that just never changes. And Swift was really prescient on showing us the entire intellectual lineage of how we've moved away from even being able, and in our age, we can't talk about the immaterial at all. I mean, we just don't have a vocabulary for it. In Swift's time, that it's actively, those words are actively disappearing.
The first book you've selected is a modest proposal for presenting the children of poor people in Ireland being a burden on their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public, from 1729. Swift satirizes British policy and rationalist social theory by proposing with a straight face that the poor sell their children as food to the rich. Have you chosen this book first because it's disturbingly close to some current policies?
Oh, I haven't even thought about that. In theory, it ought not to be, because in 2014, Ireland has its own government. I
I was
think.
thinking more of, for example, of issues such as abortion, which is widespread today, and
Oh,
that was a
well,
connection.
sure. So. Uh, yeah, okay. So the modest proposal is offered as an alternative to abortion. That because of poverty, people are having too many children, and we want to. So in a modest proposal, abortion is something that we want to eradicate. But the way to do it is to consume the children who would have been aborted by eating them, and so that's so what he's trying to do, I think, there is kind of I guess I mean, so it's not about abortion per se, but we can talk about the dignity of the human person.
Yeah.
In this sense, that there's something good about the writer of a modest proposal. He pretends to be this projector who writes for the universal improvement of mankind, and I want to help people out because the Irish have too many children, and they turn into beggars and thieves, and so what we want to do is just to eliminate that. And he offers this absurd political position to eradicate that. But really, at the heart of it is to raise children in order to eat them. What Swift does, and he often does in his satire, is that he literalizes a metaphor. And keep in mind that Ireland doesn't have a political voice. That every decision that happens in Ireland has already been decided in London, and basically because of high rents and because of there not really being a lot of opportunities, the Ireland population is starving to death. And when you starve to death, you eat yourself. Your body eats itself. And so what he does is that he literalizes that metaphor. And says, well, why don't we turn this into a commodity? So this idea of children getting in the way of somebody's financial gain. I mean, I think that you see that as a rationale for abortion. Abortion, where it becomes just a form of birth control in our time. And so so I think that I think for Swift, it's not like, okay, well, this is going to happen because everybody is impoverished. It's more like it's happening because we don't have a respect for being made in the image and likeness of God. And that what he does over the course of that essay is to call women breeders, and then to compare them to sheep and cattle and livestock, so that the human dimension is completely taken out, and then you just see matter that can be consumed for food. So very much an attack on the dignity of the human person that is kind of one of the subjects of that essay.
Thank you for listening. To read or listen to the rest of this interview and gain full access to our archive, visit 5booksforcatholics.com and become a premium subscriber. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and give it a top rating on the platform of your choice. That way, more people can discover it. You can also support the podcast and help us produce more interviews like this one by making a one-off donation via the link given in the show notes. As little as $1, £1, or €1 can help and will be greatly appreciated. Thank you once again, and God bless.